All right, we have about 15 pages left. Some of it will be review anyway, like input, text input. So we won't spend a lot of time on this. My guess is we'll be done before 2, and that will include me giving out the homework assignment and explaining a couple things about the assignment. Okay? All right. So for text input, as it says, use edit text. You know how to use an edit text already. You know what the max lines is and what the lines is. All right. So I don't think there's really anything new that's in there. So the attributes, okay. Now it says here, notice the difference between max lines and lines. It says lines set the text entry to show 2 lines even if the length is less. One thing you shouldn't do is you shouldn't take and make your area real small, but then set your max lines and your lines to a big number. That should just make sense. All right. The input type we've talked about already, numbers, number signed, etc., number decimal. We've looked at all those already. You can, as it says, go in there and play with the text color and all that. I don't really care. All right. That does remind me, though, just so you know, because you're going to need some time next week, because a week from Monday, the first iteration of your project is due. And remember, that's worth like whatever, I think it's 250 points out of a possible 1,500. So that's 16% of your grade for the project is right there. All right. And at that time, I'll give you the next part, let you know when that'll be due, etc. That probably won't be due till maybe like the week after the break or something like that. I don't know. All right. All right. Remember to give everything an ID. Nothing new there. You don't have to do this anymore. You know that you don't have to cast. In fact, if you do cast it now, typically you'll end up getting a warning. It won't give you an error, but it'll give you a warning telling you you don't have to do it. One thing I've never understood is I always thought that everything you put into an edit text was text. But technically, it's a character sequence. It's not exactly a string. That's why you need to run the toString method on it. All right. Also, you may or may not have noticed that I use value of a lot in my programs. Almost always when I use the value of and I go over on the side, it tells me that that's redundant, that I don't need to, that it's automatically applied to numeric variables. Pardon my French, but screw them. I'm doing it anyway. All right. I mean, that's just the way I was taught to do things. So I keep doing it that way. All right. This part's new. Changing keyboards and input behavior. As it says, the Android system shows an on-screen keyboard known as the soft keyboard. All right. When it gets to focus. That's not new. It says it also provides an extensible framework for advanced programmers to develop and install their own input method editors. They're called IMEs, okay, as it says, for speech input, etc. Now, I've never had anybody do this. I wouldn't expect either one of you to do this. But I could envision the day when one of my students comes in and is either hearing, sight, or whatever impaired and might actually do something like this to come up with their own thing. I think that'd be pretty cool. All right. I wouldn't expect it from either of you, but that might be something that somebody in that situation might be interested in doing, because they'd probably do more of a job of putting their heart and soul into it if it was something they could directly benefit from. So as it says, you declare the input method by putting the input type in there. This would be a phone. All right. And here's some other ones. Why is this important? Why am I even telling you about this? Well, notice like password. All right. Email address. So it's, again, this stuff already. It's going to basically set the keyboard type up, all right, in an associated manner. Okay. All right. Now, this is where it changes a little, changing the action key in the keyboard. As it says on Android devices, the action key is the return key. Normally it's used to enter another line of text, etc., etc. If you set the input type with a value such as text cap characters or text autocomplete, the return key closes the keyboard. So in other words, you can overwrite the default actions of these things. And that's pretty much what they're saying here. If you want to enter something other than text, such as a phone number, you may want to change the action key to an icon for a send key. And they show you how to do that in here, or how you can do that in here. All right. And then it says you use the set on editor action listener to set the listener to respond with this. The main way that this is going to be used with this IME, all right, one of the main ways it's going to be used is you can sit there and basically say that you want to disable a hard keyboard, which means that when you do that, you're disabling the keyboard that comes on your computer. And again, I've already mentioned to you that the reason for doing something like that would be that if people are going to run it basically on their phones, they're not going to have a hard keyboard to work with anyway. All right. Dialogues and pickers, these are kind of neat because it's the equivalent of an input box. I don't know if you guys remember this because we just finished up the array. They had their test on arrays today, but you may or may not remember one of the things, and I know I had you guys do it too because I looked at an old program, that we did was in our C# program, we went in and added a Visual Basic reference so we could use an input box, which exists in Visual Basic, but doesn't exist in C#. That's kind of what this is. All right, it's an input box. You're giving people some information. All right, now you could say, no, it's more like a message box. You could basically say either one. All right, but it says a dialogue is a window that appears on top or fills the display, interrupting the flow of activity. You should minimize those. In other words, you should only bring up a dialogue box if it's something pretty important. They forgot to do something, they didn't do something, they did something they shouldn't do, or whatever. Otherwise, as it says, to show critical information, if a decision is required, etc. All right. It says you would typically use a dialogue to show an alert, such as an OK or cancel. Now, what does that mean? One of the things I'm hoping that we're going to be doing soon, sooner than later, is creating a simple to-do list. All right. And one of the things we'll do is we will set it up so if you want to eliminate an item from the to-do list, you'll do something, click a button or do whatever. But what if you were accidentally highlighted the wrong item? You know, you'd have to either have a way to bring it back, or you'd have to bring up some kind of a dialogue that said, are you sure you want to delete mow the lawn or something? Oh, that wouldn't be great now, but you get the idea, right? So that's what we're going to be doing. Okay. As it says, the base class for this is class dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue subclasses, and you can do different things. All right. Notice here they're setting ringtones. There's playing with a date picker type of an idea. So there's a lot of different ways that this stuff can be used. So they talk in here about, as it says, the dialogue class is a base class for dialogues, but you should avoid instantiating dialogue directly unless you're creating a custom one. It says for standard dialogues, you use either an alert or you use a date picker. So here's an example of the alert. Again, we're going to write one of those. All right, and it's actually, believe it or not, can be more code than you think it would be. All right, because you have to say, you have to create the code to make the alert, then you have to create the code that you want to run if they say agree, and the one that they for disagree type of thing in this example, or cancel, discard, whatever it happens to be. So they start to show that in here. As it says, it uses the builder design pattern, which makes it easy to create an object from a class with a lot of required and a lot of other types of attributes. This is all the stuff, and again, much of this is typically referred to as almost boilerplate code. So in other words, you're going to need to input this stuff. You're going to need to write something that's going to look like this. Typically, when I get into that situation, I'm like, you know what? It already exists. I don't mind naming my stuff, like this, or if I'm going to, or at least grabbing this and then changing it to my name and just using their code. All right. Setting the buttons, well, what is it? It's positive button usually means yes, negative button means no. That makes sense? But it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Positive could mean okay, negative could mean cancel. So it depends on the type of dialogue that you're writing. All right, but you put a code in there for both the positive and for the negative. So again, in this case, it was okay, cancel, but it could be yes, no. And it gets to be even hinkier. What if you got 3 buttons? What if you got yes, no, or cancel, etc.? Then there's even more code that you have to write. All right. As it says, you can set a neutral button, which appears between the positive and the negative. Something like remind me later. I don't know about you, but I hate those darn things that come up. Mine pop up right over here that says that you're due for an update. on your stuff? Do you want it to happen now? Well, yeah, right as I'm in the middle of class, of course. All right. Now I'll say remind me later type of thing. All right. Then there's the date and time picker. And hopefully you both understand that well enough that that makes sense to you. All right. I had a student when they did their project. This is Tiffany. It must have been about 2 years ago. She did hers. She did a budgetary thing, but then she brought into that the to-do list we did as a class, and she actually put in like a time picker in here. So you can say like when you plan on having it done type of an idea. All right. But if you were doing any kind of schedule appointment thing, that might be something that you'd use. All right. All right, it says here when you're showing a picker, you should use an instance of a dialogue fragment. What a fragment is, it's part of a screen. It's a fragment of the screen. So as it says, a fragment is a behavior or a portion of the interface within the activity, sort of an activity within the activity. What you can do, we're not doing a lot of that, if any, this semester, but once you get to be much more attuned and you're working with us maybe full time, you'd probably be using fragments because then you can separate your screen up into different areas. All right. Now that's probably going to be done more if you're writing applications that are going to be used on a tablet. But if they're on the phone, you got such a small area anyway that you may or may not be using those. Okay. As it says, one benefit of using fragments for pickers is you can isolate the code for managing, in this case, the date and time. All right. Another benefit is that you can implement different layout configurations. So especially like horizontal, portrait and landscape, for example. All right. So they go through this. I'm not going to run through this right now because I'd be just doing a lot of reading. All right. If you decide that, if this has a place, putting a date picker has a place in what you're doing, fine. All right. I mean, if I have not created the next assignments for the menus, etc., for the next part, and probably what's going to happen is you're going to have 3 sets of assignments. The ones I'm giving you today are for 4-1. Then I'm going to take 4-2 and 4-3, and we're going to combine those into one assignment. It might only be one problem. And then 4-4, the recycler view will either be 1 or 2 problems. And then when we get done with all that, we'll do the test on all of Chapter 4, and it'll end up being another take-home test. All right, so you'll have at least a couple days to work on it in class, plus you'll be able to take it home that night. All right. So there's a lot of stuff in here that's working with this picker. Again, I'm not going to go through all that. All right, gestures then are next. As it says, a touch gesture occurs when the user places 1 or more fingers on their screen. Typically, it's a fling. You want to move up, etc. All right. If your app uses common gestures, as it says, you can take advantage of the gesture detector class. Now, this might be something that you're going to use in yours. This might be something that you might say, hell no, I'm just going to be as far away from this as possible. All right. As long as what you're using is intuitive. In other words, with what you're doing, if it's button oriented or menu oriented, that's totally fine. But it should be set up so that any, pardon my French, not French, but any idiot can use it and understand what they're doing. That's all. And if you do that, you've done what you're supposed to be doing. All right. As it says, if you want to be able to detect all gestures, you gather data about the touch event, and then you interpret to see if it's one of the ones that's the built-in events. All right, they give examples right here. All right, and that's it for this one. So like I said, what we will do for the rest of the period is right now I'm going to give you your homework, and I'm going to go over it with you. Then the rest of the period is lab. Tomorrow, we're going to rebuild the calculator interface. I already asked you to create the basic interface structure for it. All right, I'll show you what I called my stuff. All right, and we'll go over that as a class tomorrow. All right, and then the rest of the period tomorrow will be lab. And during that time, I hope to be able to write the interface for putting in the menus, which is the next thing that we'll talk about. All right, so if we can do all that, we'll go over 4.2 then on Monday. It's not a real long section, and then we'll put a menu onto our calculator app. Maybe that's not the best one. I don't know which one I'm going to use, but we'll see. All right, I know it's got 5 options, so we could include it and do something like this. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, to put in two numbers and then bring up a menu and click add. To me, that's kind of not intuitive, but it's something we could do. So I don't remember how long this is, but it starts on about 150. And it goes to 178. So it's shorter than today's was. All right, it's about 25 pages. Okay, so let me pass out the homework, and I'll bring it up on here also. Get rid of that. We don't need that anymore. It must be here. Yep, there it is. And there's a bunch of pictures on there. Don't let the size of this bug you. There's two problems. So we've already looked at the first one. And as it says, when you look on here, I'm turning the first page over. Edit text, edit text, edit text, edit text. Does that make sense? That name, address, city, and zip code are all edit text? That makes sense? All right, state is a spinner. Gender are radio buttons. Shift are checkboxes. The settings is one of those toggle switches. And where that shopping cart there is an image button. All that makes sense? So as it says right here, and I'm not going to read to you because that's all the stuff that's in there. If the user leaves any of these blank, so if name is blank or address is blank or city is blank or zip code is blank, all right, as it says in here, assign the constant NIP, no input provided, to that. All right. And really, you should look in there, and one thing you'd want to make sure of is see if there's a trim method. All right, if there's a trim method, you really should be running trim on it so the user can't just hit the space bar, all right, to get out of something. Okay, when you click the button, print out the information in a toast as is shown on the third page. If you don't like my format right here, make your own. That's totally fine. All right, if you decide you want the gender, the buttons to be laid out horizontally instead of vertically, that might have made more sense. If you want the shift to be laid out horizontally rather than vertically, it would give you more room. You want to do that? Go ahead. I don't care. All right. And so when you click this button here, something like this should come up. But again, if you select no gender, it shouldn't allow that. If you select more than one thing on shift, all of the ones that you select should be shown. Does all that make sense? All right. The second one there, and don't use this one. That is real. I don't know why. That is really ugly. All right. But the second one, as it says, create an Android app called Currency Converter. And it says an example is shown below. Here's two URLs that might help you. So let me bring those up and just show them to you. All right, here's the first one. It's pretty obvious. So if I come in here, US, if I put in $100, and if I want to know if my program's working okay, that's what I should get for euros. That's what I should get for pounds. And I think the other one what we said was Japanese yen. So that one you might have to search for. Japanese yen. So there's that one. Does all that make sense? All right. So that's one of them. The other one is pretty much the same thing. Boy, he keeps asking this. You can do it in here the same way. So notice if I put an amount in there, so I'm going to just come in here and put in $100. And I want to go from, in this case, all right, euros to pounds. All right, and click, boom, there it is. And I only brought those up so that if you want to check what you're doing. Okay, now think about this. If you were going to do this for your final project, right now I expect you to take those exchange rates that are in there. I expect you to just hard code those in. Okay, so if you do it today, there's a chance that when you hand it in, those exchange rates could have changed, correct? But if you were actually doing this for your project, then what you'd have to do, and we haven't gotten to that point yet, would be to make changes into your manifest file, your manifest.xml file, and ask permission to use the internet, and then you'd go out to the internet and find the exchange rate so it was always up to date. Okay? All right. So as it says, use the 4 most popular currencies, and I literally typed in 4 most popular currencies, and it gave me the 8 most popular, and they were almost all the ones we had in here, or I had in here, but I just changed it to the top ones. The US dollar, the European euro, the Japanese yen, and the British pound. They were in that order. If the user, now there's 2 ways that you can do this. There's an easy way and there's a hard way. The easy way is, let's say you do it like this. US dollar to US dollar, there's no conversion that takes place. Would you agree with that? So you can put a toast in here if you want. And that just says there's no conversion to be done, or the from and to are the same, whatever you want. The other thing, if you want to try to do this, it's more work, but I've had people do this in the past, is what they do is if you choose dollar here in the from, on the to over here, you disable the dollar. All right, see what I'm saying? So you can't have 2 of them that are the same. You can do it either way. If you're like, no, that's too hard, I tried doing it and I have no idea what I'm doing, then don't do it that way. That's totally fine. All right. Not shown. Add a second activity. Call it whatever you want. Converter activity, currency converter activity. I don't care. And pass to that second activity the from. So in this case, it would be US dollar. The to, let's assume this said Japanese yen here. All right. So in fact, let's use the example. So in that case, the from is US dollar. The to is Japanese yen. And the associated amounts. So 1234.56 US dollars. I'd like it to look nicer than this. I don't like the way this looks. All right, what do I mean? Well, the third URL that I gave you right here, if you go to that URL, let me just show it to you. It's right here. It actually shows the symbols. So you know what a dollar symbol is. It's on your keyboard. But for the pound, etc., you can go look through here. So if I look British pound, I know you might have to search for it, but it's in here. All right. So I'd like it to basically have that symbol. I just think it looks a little nicer. For instance, if you don't know what the British pound kind of looks like the letter L. All right. So I'd want it to look like that. Plus, if you remember this one when I did this before, no, don't do this. Just do it to 2 decimal places. So you can do a string.format. You can set up a pattern. Do it whatever way you want. But to me, that looks very unprofessional. All right, I'd want it to say 100.00 euros equals 86.50 British pounds. Does that make sense? All right, with the symbols in there as well. Okay. So there's pictures of all that. Any questions on what I'm asking you to do? All right, so you can get started on that right now. If nothing else, at least build the interface. Again, please don't use this because that is really ugly. But just go out to Google Images, or I've never even looked at Unsplash or Pexels for something like this. Google Images should work just fine if you type in currency converter. All right. Just remember, you don't want the picture to take away from the message. That's what this is doing. This is such a busy picture that it takes away from what we're trying to do. And I don't want that. All right. So pick out whatever you want. There are no other questions, and the rest of the period is yours.